When I logged into my son's college savings account to check the balance, I expected to see the result of years of careful planning and sacrifice. It was a routine I'd fallen into, monitoring the account to make sure we stayed on track for his future. But this time, something was wrong. Instead of the substantial balance I had worked so hard to build, the screen displayed a chilling number: 0. I blinked, convinced it had to be a mistake. I refreshed the page, hoping against hope that the error would correct itself. It didn't. The number remained the same, staring back at me like an accusation. My heart pounded as I clicked into the transaction history, desperate for answers. What I found made my blood run cold. A series of withdrawals had drained the account, each one a blow to my carefully constructed plans. The transactions weren't recent. They stretched back over several months, all tied to payments made to a fertility clinic. My stomach churned as I pieced it together. The only other person with access to the account was my mom. I sat there in disbelief, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. My mom had been helping me manage the account since my son was born. At the time, it seemed like a practical arrangement. She was good with finances, and I trusted her implicitly. Now, that trust felt like a cruel joke. The evidence was undeniable. She had stolen the money meant for my son's future to pay for someone else's dreams. My thoughts immediately turned to my sister, Emily, who had been struggling with infertility for years. I sympathized with her pain, but this, using my son's college fund without even telling me, it was a betrayal I couldn't fathom. My hands trembled as I clicked through the records again, hoping I had missed something, that there was another explanation. But the dates, the amounts, and the destination all lined up perfectly. My mom had siphoned off the money little by little, thinking I wouldn't notice. The rage and betrayal hit me like a tidal wave. This wasn't just about the money. It was about the trust she had broken and the future she had jeopardized for my son. That fund wasn't just numbers on a screen. It was late nights working overtime, skipping vacations, and saying no to things I wanted so that my son could have a better life. I sat in the silence of my living room, the glow of the laptop screen illuminating the evidence of my mom's betrayal. A million questions swirled in my mind. How could she do this? Why didn't she tell me? And how was I supposed to face her now? One thing was clear. I couldn't let this slide. This wasn't just a mistake. It was a theft of my son's future. And I was going to get answers, no matter what it took. The shock of seeing my son's college fund drained hadn't worn off by the next morning. I woke up with a sinking feeling in my chest, and as much as I wanted to believe it was all a bad dream, the empty account wasn't going to refill itself. The sickening reality was that my mom had stolen from me, and more importantly, from my son. As I sat with a cup of coffee I couldn't bring myself to drink, I began replaying old conversations with my mom in my mind. She had always been close to Emily, my sister, who had been struggling with infertility for years. I'd heard the pain in Emily's voice during family gatherings when the topic of children came up, and I'd seen the longing in her eyes when she looked at other people's babies. My mom had always been vocal about her sympathy for Emily. She deserves to be a mom, she'd said more than once. It's just not fair that she has to go through this. I had agreed, of course. Emily didn't deserve the pain she was going through. But those conversations, once harmless, now took on a more sinister tone. Suddenly, little comments my mom had made over the past year began to click. She'd often talk about how expensive IVF treatments were and how Emily and her husband were struggling to afford it. At the time, I thought she was just venting, sharing her worries as moms do. But now I realized she'd been testing the waters, dropping hints that I had completely missed. She's so devastated, my mom had said during one of those conversations. I wish there was something I could do to help. It hadn't seemed like a big deal at the time. My mom was always emotional when it came to her kids, and I figured she was just expressing her frustration. But now those words felt more like a confession in hindsight, a warning I hadn't picked up on because I trusted her too much. The more I pieced it together, the angrier I became. This wasn't just about money. It was about the betrayal of a trust that had been sacred to me. That college fund wasn't just a number in a bank account. It was the result of years of sacrifice and planning. It was my son's future, something I had worked tirelessly to build for him since the day he was born. And my mom had taken it all without even asking. I found myself flipping through photos of my son as a baby, remembering the late nights I'd spent working extra hours, the vacations I'd skipped, the little luxuries I had given up to make sure his future was secure. All of that had been for him, and my mom had decided, unilaterally, that Emily's dreams mattered more. It wasn't that I didn't feel for Emily. I did. I couldn't imagine the pain she must have been in, the frustration of wanting something so deeply and feeling like it was slipping through her fingers. But the more I thought about it, the clearer it became. My mom had made a choice. She had decided that Emily's happiness was more important than my son's future, and she hadn't even given me the courtesy of a conversation. I stared at the transaction records again, the names of the fertility clinics, and the amounts paid out over months. This hadn't been a momentary lapse in judgment. This was premeditated. My hands trembled as I closed the laptop, my mind racing. How could she justify this? Did she think I wouldn't notice? Did she think I wouldn't care? As the anger boiled inside me, I knew one thing for certain. I couldn't let this slide. My mom had crossed a line, and it wasn't just about the money. It was about the blatant disregard for me and my son, for everything we had worked for. This wasn't going to go away quietly. I was going to get answers, and I was going to make sure she understood just how much damage she had done. I didn't let the anger simmer for long. The very next day, I drove to my mom's house, the weight of betrayal making my chest tight. Each mile felt heavier than the last as I rehearsed what I was going to say, but nothing I practiced could prepare me for the reality of facing her. When I arrived, she opened the door with her usual warm smile, the kind that used to make me feel safe. But today, it only made my anger boil hotter. How could she act like everything was fine? How could she stand there, smiling, when she had stolen so much from me? "We need to talk," I said, skipping the pleasantries. My voice trembled, but whether from anger or nerves, I wasn't sure. "About the college fund." Her smile faltered for a fraction of a second before she composed herself. "Oh," she said softly, as if I had brought up a minor inconvenience. She stepped aside, motioning for me to come in. "Let's talk about it inside." I followed her into the living room, every step feeling like a weight dragging me down. She sat on the couch, gesturing for me to join her, but I stayed standing, arms crossed. "I checked the account," I said, cutting straight to the point. "The money is gone. Every penny. And the withdrawals? They were for a fertility clinic. Care to explain?" She sighed, looking down at her hands, as though gathering her thoughts. "I was going to tell you," she said, her tone calm, as if this was a perfectly reasonable conversation. "But it was for a good cause. Your sister needed that money." The words hit me like a slap. I stared at her, incredulous. "You stole from me," I said slowly, trying to keep my voice steady. "From your grandson. And you think it's okay because it was for Emily's?" "It's not stealing," she replied, her voice growing defensive. "It's family. Emily was desperate, and I couldn't just stand by and do nothing. You have a healthy son, but she didn't even have a chance to be a mother. Don't you think she deserves that?" "Of course I feel for Emily," I said, my anger bubbling to the surface. "But that money wasn't yours to take. It was for my son's future, for his education. You had no right." "You'll figure it out," she said dismissively, as though the solution was obvious. "You're smart and resourceful. You'll find another way to pay for college." But Emily needed that money now. This was her last chance. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She wasn't even apologizing. She had taken everything I had worked for, and she was acting like I was the one being unreasonable. "Do you even hear yourself?" I asked, my voice shaking. "You're justifying stealing from your own grandson. How do you not see how wrong this is?" "I did what I thought was right," she said firmly. "And I'd do it again. You should be happy for your sister. This is about bringing life into the world, about family." Her words left me speechless. Happy? She wanted me to be happy that she had stolen my son's future to fund my sister's dreams? The audacity of it made my head spin. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my emotions in check. "This isn't about being happy for Emily," I said. "This is about the fact that you made a choice that wasn't yours to make. You put her needs above mine, above my son's, and you didn't even tell me." "I knew you wouldn't understand," she said, shaking her head. "That's why I didn't tell you. But one day, you'll see that this was the right thing to do." Her calm, almost condescending tone was the final straw. I stood up, my hands shaking. "You're unbelievable," I said, my voice cracking with emotion. "You think you're the hero here, but all you've done is ruin the trust one had in you. And I'm not going to let this slide." I left her house without waiting for a response, my mind racing with what I would do next. One thing was certain. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I stared at her, trying to process the words that had just come out of her mouth. "You stole my son's college fund," I said, enunciating each word as if saying them slower would somehow make her realize how absurd it sounded. "To pay for Emily's IVF? My mom didn't flinch. Instead, she let out a long sigh and gestured for me to sit down on the couch. Her calmness, her utter lack of remorse, made my blood boil. "It's not stealing," she said, her tone even and measured, like she was explaining something to a child. "It's family." Emily was desperate, and I couldn't stand to see her in pain. "You have a healthy son, but she didn't even have a chance to be a mother. Don't you think she deserves that?" Her justification hit me like a slap. My mind raced, replaying her words over and over. Family, desperate, deserves. Each one felt like an excuse, a way to downplay the gravity of what she had done. "Of course I feel for Emily," I said, my voice shaking with anger. "But that money wasn't yours to take. It was for my son's future." She waved her hand dismissively, as if I had brought up a minor inconvenience instead of a monumental betrayal. "You'll figure it out," she said, her tone carrying a maddening certainty. "You're resourceful. You'll find another way to pay for college." But Emily didn't have time to wait. This was her last chance to have a baby. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Do you even hear yourself?" I snapped. "You're acting like this was your decision to make, like my son's future doesn't matter as much as Emily's dream of having a baby. This is about bringing life into the world," she said, her voice rising slightly. "Your son already has a life. He's healthy, smart, and loved. Emily didn't even have a chance to start a family. How can you not see the bigger picture here?" Her calm rationalization was like gasoline on a fire. "The bigger picture?" I said, standing up, unable to sit still any longer. "The bigger picture is that you've jeopardized my son's future, all because you decided Emily's pain was more important than what we've worked for. You had no right, Mom. None." But she didn't seem to understand, or maybe she just didn't care. She looked at me with a mixture of pity and frustration, as if I was the unreasonable one. "You're overreacting," she said finally. "It's not like I threw the money away. It went to something meaningful, something that will bring joy to this family." "You threw it away as far as I'm concerned," I shot back. "You didn't even have the decency to ask me first. You just decided on your own that my son's future didn't matter." Her face hardened. "That's not what I said," she said sharply. "I've done so much for you over the years, and this is how you repay me? By making me feel like a criminal for helping your sisters?" Her attempt to guilt me only fueled my anger. "This isn't about repayment," I said, my voice rising. "This is about the fact that you crossed a line. You betrayed me. And instead of apologizing, you're trying to make me feel guilty for being angry. How can you not see how wrong that is?" For the first time, her calm demeanor cracked. She looked at me with genuine frustration, her hands clenching into fists. "I did what I had to do," she said, her voice low. "Emily needed that money, and I don't regret helping her. You'll understand someday, when you have a family of your own to take care of." "I have a family of my own," I said through gritted teeth. "My son. The one you stole from." The room fell silent, the weight of my words hanging between us. My mom's face softened, but not with remorse. It was the kind of soft pity reserved for someone who doesn't get it. "You'll see," she said quietly. "One day, you'll see that this was for the best." Her certainty, her refusal to even acknowledge what she had done as wrong, was too much. I couldn't stay in that house a moment longer. "If you think this is over," I said, grabbing my bag, "you're wrong. I'm not just going to let this go." I left without looking back, her words echoing in my mind. "You'll figure it out. You're overreacting. It's family." I wasn't overreacting. I wasn't going to figure it out alone. And this wasn't about family. This was about betrayal, and I wasn't going to let it slide. After the confrontation with my mom, I needed someone to vent to, someone who might help me make sense of the betrayal I felt. I called my cousin, Michelle, who had always been the level-headed one in the family. She listened intently as I poured out the whole story, the drained account, the IVF payments, and my mom's infuriating dismissal of what she'd done. "Wait," Michelle said when I finished, her voice tinged with disbelief. "Are you telling me she emptied your son's college fund? For Emily?" "Yes," I said, my anger bubbling up again just from repeating it. And when I confronted her, she acted like I was the selfish one. Michelle was as outraged as I was, but our conversation didn't stay private for long. By the end of the week, it seemed like everyone in the family knew, and the reactions were far from what I expected. Instead of support, I was met with backlash. My mom called me the day after Michelle, and I spoke, her voice tight with anger. "I can't believe you're airing our family's business like this," she said. "This isn't something the whole world needs to know." I wouldn't have to if you hadn't done something so outrageous, I snapped. You stole from me, Mom. What did you expect me to do? Just quietly accept it. You're being selfish, she said, her tone dripping with indignation. This isn't about you. It's about giving Emily a chance to be happy. You're making it all about money when it's about something much bigger than that. Family, love, life. Don't you care about your sister? Her words stung, but I refused to let her guilt me into silence. Of course I care about Emily, I said. But I also care about my son. And you made it very clear whose future you value more. That money wasn't yours to give, and you had no right to decide for me. You're overreacting, she said, brushing me off again. Emily's baby will bring joy to this whole family. You'll see. One day you'll thank me for this. Her certainty was maddening, but the worst part was realizing that she genuinely didn't think she had done anything wrong. Even Emily got involved, though her response was more defensive than apologetic. She called me one evening, her voice cautious but firm. Look, she said, I didn't ask her to do this. I didn't even know she was taking the money until after the treatments were already paid for. Then why didn't you tell her to stop? I asked, my frustration spilling over. Why didn't you say, hey, maybe don't steal from my nephew's future? Emily sighed. Because it was already done, she said. And honestly, this isn't my fault. I'm just trying to have a family. I didn't force Mom to do anything. Her words felt like a punch to the gut. You didn't stop her either, I said, my voice shaking. You knew what she did was wrong, and you let it happen because it benefited you. I'm sorry you're upset, she said, her tone cold, but you can't take it back now. And it's not fair to put this all on me. I'm not the one who took the money. Her dismissal left me stunned. It was as though my sacrifices, my hard work, and my son's future didn't matter as long as Emily got what she wanted. The more I tried to explain my side to the family, the more isolated I felt. My mom had painted me as the villain, the heartless sister who couldn't see the bigger picture. Emily's baby will bring so much joy to this family, one of my aunts said during a heated phone call. How can you be so angry about that? It's not like your son won't go to college. You'll figure it out. Figure it out. That seemed to be everyone's answer, as if rebuilding the fund was as simple as snapping my fingers. No one seemed to care about the late nights I'd worked, the vacations I'd skipped, the countless sacrifices I'd made to save that money in the first place. The message was clear. As long as Emily got what she wanted, nothing else mattered. Not my son, not me, not the trust my mom had shattered. I hung up the phone that night feeling more alone than ever, but I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't let them bully me into silence. My son's future was worth fighting for, no matter what anyone else thought. Weeks of arguments, guilt trips, and endless justifications had worn me down, but they hadn't broken me. Every time I tried to reason with my mom, she dismissed my concerns or deflected the blame. Conversations with other family members didn't fare much better. I realized that if I wanted any chance of making things right, I had to draw a firm line. I went to my mom's house one last time, determined to put an end to the chaos. As I sat across from her at the kitchen table, I laid out my position as clearly as I could. Mom, I began, keeping my voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside me. I've thought about this long and hard. I expect you to repay the money you took from the college fund. All of it, no matter how long it takes. Her reaction wasn't what I expected. She laughed. It wasn't a nervous laugh or one of disbelief. It was the kind of dismissive chuckle that made my blood boil. Where do you think I'm going to get that kind of money? She asked, shaking her head. Be serious. I clenched my fists under the table, forcing myself to stay calm. I am serious, I said. You made a choice to take that money, and now you need to take responsibility for it. I did this for Emily, she said, her voice firm. And I don't regret it. You'll just have to find another way to pay for college. You're smart. You'll figure it out. Her refusal to acknowledge the harm she'd done pushed me to the brink. You don't regret it? I repeated, my voice rising. You don't regret stealing from your grandson? From your own daughters? You're blowing this out of proportion, she said, waving her hand dismissively. That money wasn't wasted. It was used for something meaningful. Emily's going to have a baby. That's worth more than any amount of money. Her nonchalant tone, her refusal to even entertain the idea of taking responsibility, was the final straw. I stood up, my hands trembling with frustration. If you don't repay the money, I said, my voice low but firm, I'll take legal action. Her eyes widened in shock, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of fear. You wouldn't, she said, her voice tinged with disbelief. I'm your mother. You're also the person who stole from me, I replied, my anger simmering just beneath the surface. This isn't about family, it's about what's right. You took something that didn't belong to you, and now you have to make it right. She stared at me, her expression a mixture of anger and hurt. Do you know what you're saying? She asked, her voice shaking. You're willing to drag your own family into court over this? Over money? It's not just money, I said, meeting her gaze. It's my son's future. It's years of hard work, of sacrifices I made to give him a chance at something better. And you took that away without a second thought. If you can't see why that matters, then maybe you need to face the consequences. Her defiance wavered for a moment, but then she straightened her shoulders and crossed her arms.
Fine, she said coldly.
Do what you have to do. But don't expect me to forgive you for this. I felt a pang of sadness at her words, but I pushed it aside. This wasn't about her forgiveness, it was about accountability. As I left her house, I realized that I had reached my breaking point, and there was no turning back. I didn't want to take legal action against my own mother. The thought of it made me sick to my stomach. But I couldn't let her actions go unchecked. If drawing this line meant losing her trust or her approval, so be it. I had a responsibility to my son, and I wasn't going to let him down. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of clarity. I had spent so much time trying to make her understand, to get her to see my side, but now I realized that it didn't matter. I wasn't doing this for her approval, I was doing it because it was the right thing to do. The fallout from my decision to demand accountability from my mom rippled through the entire family, like a tidal wave. It didn't take long before the phone calls started coming in, each one more infuriating than the last. My aunts, uncles, cousins, they all had opinions, and none of them were on my side. I can't believe you're doing this to your own mother, my Aunt Linda said during one particularly heated call. She was just trying to help Emily. You're blowing this way out of proportion. It's not your money she stole, I snapped back. She took my son's college fund without asking. How am I supposed to just let it go like nothing happened? Linda sighed dramatically. Emily's IVF was a gift. You can't put a price on life. Think about the joy this baby will bring to the family. Isn't that more important than some college fund? That seemed to be the consensus among the family, that Emily's potential baby outweighed everything else. No one wanted to talk about the betrayal, the violation of trust, or the financial mess my mom had left behind. All they cared about was supporting Emily's dream, even if it came at my son's expense. You're being selfish, my Uncle John said in a separate call. This isn't just about money. It's about giving your sister a chance at happiness. Can't you see that? Selfish, I repeated, barely able to keep my voice steady. I'm the selfish one for wanting to protect my son's future? For wanting to hold my mom accountable for stealing from me? You're overreacting, he said dismissively. It's family. Sometimes you have to make sacrifices for the greater good. Sacrifices? I said, incredulous. I've already sacrificed years of hard work to save that money. And now my mom has sacrificed it for me, without my permission. How is that fair? But no matter how many times I explained my side, it was like talking to a wall. The family had chosen their narrative. I was the villain who cared more about money than family, and my mom was the misunderstood matriarch who had only acted out of love. The hardest part was seeing how the tension affected my son. At 6 years old, he didn't fully understand what was going on, but he could sense the shift in the family dynamic. He noticed the absence of phone calls from Grandma, the lack of invitations to family gatherings, and the whispered arguments I tried to hide from him. Why is everyone mad at you, Mom? He asked one evening as I tucked him into bed. His big brown eyes searched mine, looking for answers I didn't know how to give. I hugged him tightly, my heart breaking a little more with each passing moment. It's complicated, sweetheart, I said, brushing a strand of hair from his face. But I'm doing this because I love you. I want to make sure you have everything you need to follow your dreams. He nodded, though I wasn't sure he fully understood. I love you too, Mom, he said softly, wrapping his arms around my neck. That simple declaration of love strengthened my resolve. No matter what the rest of the family thought, I was doing this for him. He deserved a chance at a bright future, and I wasn't going to let anyone take that away from him, not even his grandmother. The backlash didn't stop, but I learned to tune it out. My family could call me selfish, heartless, or overdramatic all they wanted. I knew the truth. This wasn't about holding a grudge, it was about holding people accountable. By refusing to let this slide, I wasn't just standing up for myself. I was setting a boundary that should have been respected in the first place. If my family couldn't see that, it was their problem, not mine. Through it all, I leaned on my friends for support. They reminded me that standing up for what's right isn't always easy, especially when it comes to family. "You're protecting your son," my best friend, Maria, said one night over coffee. "Anyone who doesn't see that doesn't deserve a say in how you handle this." Her words became my mantra whenever the guilt and anger threatened to overwhelm me. I was doing this for my son, for his future, and for the principle of it all. And no amount of family backlash was going to change that. After weeks of heated arguments and relentless guilt trips, I realized there was no way to resolve this within the family. My mom's refusal to acknowledge her wrongdoing left me with no choice but to explore legal options. Filing a formal complaint against her felt drastic, even cruel, but the alternative, letting her walk away without consequences, wasn't an option I could live with. I scheduled a consultation with a lawyer, feeling a mix of determination and dread. As I sat in the quiet, sterile office, I explained everything: the stolen college fund, the unauthorized withdrawals, and my mom's complete lack of remorse. The lawyer listened intently, occasionally jotting down notes. "You have a strong case," she said when I finished. "This is a clear-cut instance of financial fraud. Family or not, she violated your rights, and you're well within your legal boundaries to pursue this." Her words were validating, but they didn't ease the knot in my stomach. I wasn't just filing a complaint against anyone, I was filing one against my mom. The thought made my heart ache, but I knew it was the only way to protect my son's future. The legal process was as draining as I had feared. There were countless forms to fill out, hours spent gathering evidence, and emotionally exhausting phone calls with the lawyer. Each step felt like reopening the wound my mom had inflicted, but I forced myself to push through. When the case finally made it to mediation, my mom's defiance reached a new level. She sat across from me in the sterile meeting room, her arms crossed and her face a mask of indignation. "I can't believe you're doing this," she said, her voice dripping with contempt. "Do you know what this is doing to the families?" "This isn't about the family," I replied, my voice steady despite the storm brewing inside me. "It's about what you did. You stole from me and my son, and now you have to face the consequences." The mediator outlined the terms. My mom would be required to repay the full amount she had taken from the account, albeit in small monthly installments. It wasn't ideal. I had hoped for a lump sum, but it was a step toward holding her accountable. Her resentment was palpable as she signed the agreement, her pen pressing so hard into the paper that it nearly tore. "I hope you're happy," she said as she shoved the document back toward the mediator. "This isn't about being happy," I said quietly. "It's about doing what's right." The fallout from the legal action was swift and severe. My mom refused to speak to me except when absolutely necessary, and even then, her words were curt and laced with bitterness. Our once close relationship now felt like a distant memory, replaced by a cold and uncomfortable silence. Emily, who had stayed relatively quiet during the legal proceedings, finally made her stance clear. She stopped inviting me to family events, choosing instead to side with my mom. "You could have handled this differently," she said in a brief text. "I can't believe you're putting money over family." The accusation stung, but I reminded myself that Emily wasn't the victim here. She had benefited from my mom's actions, even if she hadn't directly orchestrated them. Her refusal to acknowledge the harm that had been done only deepened the divide between us. Other family members followed suit, cutting me off or sending passive-aggressive messages about the importance of forgiveness. It was exhausting, but I refused to let their opinions sway me. I hadn't chosen this path lightly, and I wasn't going to back down just because it made people uncomfortable. Through it all, I clung to the knowledge that I was doing this for my son. The money would eventually be repaid, and while it wouldn't undo the betrayal or repair the broken relationships, it would give him the future he deserved. That thought kept me going, even on the hardest days. I didn't know if I'd ever fully reconcile with my mom or the rest of the family, but one thing was clear. I had drawn my line in the sand, and I wasn't going to let anyone cross it again. The legal battle was over, and the repayments had begun, but the journey to rebuild felt daunting. The money my mom sent each month barely made a dent in the total amount she owed. It would take years to recover the full balance, and even then, it wouldn't undo the emotional toll. I decided to take matters into my own hands, focusing on restarting my son's college fund from scratch. Every spare dollar I could save went into a new account, one that no one but me had access to. It wasn't easy. Rebuilding something that had taken years to establish felt like trying to move a mountain with a spoon. There were moments when the weight of it all threatened to overwhelm me. The family backlash lingered, and the cold silence from my mom and sister felt heavier with each passing day. But through it all, one thought kept me going. This was for my son. My friends became my lifeline during this time. They offered support, advice, and the kind of encouragement I desperately needed. Maria, my best friend, was particularly relentless in reminding me that standing up for myself and my son wasn't selfish. "You did the right thing," she said one evening as we sat in my living room, surrounded by takeout containers. "I know it doesn't feel like it right now, but protecting your son's future is the most selfless thing you could have done." "It doesn't feel that way," I admitted, picking at my food. "It feels like I've torn my family apart. I don't even know if my son will have a relationship with his grandmother anymore." Maria placed a reassuring hand on mine. "That's not on you," she said firmly. "Your mom made her choices, and now she has to live with them. You're doing what any good parent would do, putting your child first." Her words resonated with me, giving me the strength to keep pushing forward. Whenever doubt crept in, I reminded myself of why I was doing this. My son deserved a future that wasn't overshadowed by someone else's decisions. Though the road was long, I began to see glimmers of hope. The new college fund started to grow, slowly but steadily. Each contribution, no matter how small, felt like a victory. I worked extra hours, cut back on unnecessary expenses, and even took on a side hustle to speed up the process. As challenging as it was, the experience taught me resilience. It forced me to reevaluate my priorities and find strength I didn't know I had. I learned to lean on the people who truly cared about me and to let go of the toxic dynamics that had been weighing me down. The scars from my mom's betrayal didn't fade overnight, but they served as a reminder of what I had overcome. This wasn't just about rebuilding a college fund. It was about reclaiming my power and protecting what mattered most. Looking back, I realized that while the experience had been painful, it had also been transformative. It taught me the importance of boundaries, the value of self-reliance, and the unshakable strength of a parent's love for their child. I wasn't where I wanted to be yet, but I was on my way. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was in control of my own story. As time passed and the chaos settled, I found myself reflecting on everything that had happened. The betrayal, the arguments, the legal battle. They had left deep scars, but they had also taught me lessons I couldn't ignore. The most painful realization was that family isn't always synonymous with unconditional trust. Growing up, I had believed that loyalty to family was absolute, that no matter what happened, we were supposed to stick together. But my mom's actions shattered that belief. Her betrayal forced me to confront the reality that blind loyalty is dangerous, especially when it comes at the expense of what's right. Boundaries, I realized, are just as important with family as they are with anyone else. Trust isn't a given, it's earned. And when that trust is broken, it doesn't mean you have to sever ties completely, but it does mean you have to protect yourself. I still love my mom, but our relationship will never be the same. The bond we once had, the one built on years of laughter, support, and shared experiences, now feels fragile, like a vase that's been glued back together. It might look fine from a distance, but up close, the cracks are impossible to ignore. I've forgiven her, but not for her sake, for mine. Holding on to the anger and resentment only weighed me down, and I realized I needed to let go if I wanted to move forward. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. The memory of what she did serves as a reminder to be cautious, to protect myself and my son from being taken advantage of again. Emily and I are cordial when we see each other at family events, but the closeness we once shared is gone. She has her baby now, and while I'm genuinely happy for her, I can't help but feel the sting of what it cost me to help make that dream a reality, without my consent. Today, my son's future is back on track. The college fund isn't as robust as it once was, but it's growing steadily. More importantly, I've regained a sense of control over my life. The experience taught me to be vigilant, to trust my instincts, and to always prioritize what's best for my child. I've learned to set boundaries that no one, not even family, can cross. My son deserves a parent who will fight for him, who will protect his future no matter what. And while I wish the journey hadn't been so painful, I'm proud of the strength it revealed in me. No one will take advantage of us again. My mom's betrayal, as devastating as it was, gave me the clarity to see what really matters, the unshakable bond between me and my son, and the knowledge that I'm capable of standing up for what's right, even when it's hard. Looking back, I wouldn't say I'm grateful for what happened, but I am grateful for the lessons it taught me. Trust, once broken, may never fully return, but the strength you gain from standing up for yourself is something no one can ever take away. And that's a lesson I'll carry with me for the rest of my life.